Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Zach thought he knew his life. 20 years of marriage, a daughter about to graduate from college, and a routine that, despite the pressure and repetition, gave him a certain comfort. He was proud of Grace. She was his walking partner on Sundays, his partner in teasing at the dinner table, and the reason behind many of the sacrifices he'd made over the years. Vanessa, his wife, was practical, straightforward, and in everyone's eyes, a loyal companion. Even if the spark of their marriage had faded over time, Zach held on to the idea that this was the family he'd built with love and effort. That is, until the day everything flipped upside down. It happened on an ordinary night, while he was putting away the dinner dishes, when his phone rang. The number was unknown. On the other end, a man's voice, straight to the point, said, "You deserve to know. The daughter you raised isn't yours. She's mine." The call lasted less than a minute. Zach didn't even have time to react. The line went dead, and he stood there, holding the phone like it had just exploded. At first, he tried to believe it was a mistake or a cruel joke. But the voice was sure of itself. It spoke with conviction. And the name mentioned, Grace, hit a deep nerve inside him. That night, the food went cold and sleep never came. Something had been planted inside him, and it wasn't going away easily. Zach tried to ignore what he'd heard during the first few days. He forced himself to push the thoughts away every time the doubt crept back in. But everything that once felt solid now started to shake. He began remembering details that never made sense before: Vanessa's strange behavior when Grace was born, how she always avoided talking about the early days of their relationship, and that one time Grace mentioned having nightmares about a man who claimed to be her real father. Back then, he thought it was just a child's imagination. Now, those memories piled up, forming a puzzle he never wanted to solve. So he decided to do a DNA test. He acted quietly. Waited for the right moment to get a hairbrush from his daughter, contacted a discreet clinic, and waited through the longest days of his life. When he received the envelope, his whole body went cold. He opened it alone, sitting in his car. The words were right there, clearly printed: probability of paternity, 0%. His world collapsed in silence. There was no room left for doubt. The girl he raised, protected, taught to ride a bike, picked up from parties, and showed how to drive, didn't carry his blood. Overcome by a void only someone deeply betrayed can understand, Zach decided to dig deeper. He needed to understand. Not out of curiosity, but out of respect for everything he'd lived through. He went up to his parents' attic, where he'd stored boxes of memories from the beginning of his marriage. Among old photos, wedding invitations, and love notes, he found a red-covered notebook. It was Vanessa's diary. He flipped through it carefully. And there it was, entries that changed everything: dates, names, meetings described in unsettling detail. She wrote about relationships with 5 different men in the period before marrying Zach, including someone named Troy. The same name the man on the phone had used. In one passage, Vanessa wrote something that hit like a punch to the gut: "Zach has always been the most reliable. He was never my great love, but he was the safest. I needed stability, and he offered that." That destroyed any illusion he had left. The marriage, the plans, the family smiles, it all now seemed like a performance, staged by someone who'd known all along what she was hiding. Zach closed the diary, his eyes fixed on the cover. There was no going back. He spent the rest of the day isolated, rereading the entries, trying to figure out exactly where it all started to fall apart. And especially, why he'd never noticed. It was as if he'd lived 20 years inside a bubble, accepting scraps of affection as proof of real love. While Vanessa played the loyal wife, she had carefully hidden the biggest lie of all. And he, blinded by trust, failed to see the signs. From that moment on, something inside Zach changed. The pain wasn't confusing anymore, it wasn't uncertainty. Now it had shape, a name, dates, and was written in ink with the handwriting of the woman he thought he knew. The truth, harsh and raw, was right in front of him. And for the first time in 2 decades, Zach wasn't afraid to face it. Zach spent the entire night reliving the last 20 years, like rewinding an old tape, trying to pinpoint exactly where he'd been deceived. By morning, he'd already made his decision. Printing the DNA results and placing Vanessa's diary on the table was the easiest part. Waiting for her to come home and act like everything was normal took the most self-control. When she walked in and saw the papers spread out, her eyes locked on them for a few seconds. Then she looked up and let out a quiet sigh. No tears, no trembling, no attempt to deny anything. What she said was even harder to swallow: "You've always been the most stable. That's why I married you. What matters now is that we built a family." The calmness with which she handled the situation was terrifying. It was as if she'd been waiting for this moment so long that she no longer cared about the impact. For a moment, Zach considered questioning her, yelling, demanding an explanation that made sense. But he realized that trying to find logic in an act like this would just waste more of his life. He simply stood up and told her she had 1 hour to leave the house. Vanessa, without making a scene, packed a few basic things and walked out. And that hurt more than any scream or argument ever could. She left like someone going grocery shopping, like someone who knew she'd be back soon. But she wouldn't be. At least not the same way. With Vanessa gone, the hardest part remained: talking to Grace. The daughter he raised, the girl he saw take her first steps, the teenager he picked up from parties without complaint, the young woman who said she'd marry a man just like her dad. He called her to talk that weekend. She arrived carefree, laughing, telling some story from college, and sat down like she always did. He took a deep breath and got straight to it. He told her everything. Showed her the DNA test. Handed over the diary. And finally, gave her an envelope with Troy's address and contact info. He said she had the right to know who her biological father was, if she wanted to meet him. What came next broke something inside him. Grace stayed silent for a while. Then she took the envelope, looked over the papers again, and in a low, cold voice, asked why he was destroying her mother's image. Zach tried to explain that she deserved to know the truth, that he deserved it too, but Grace didn't want to listen. She called him weak, pathetic, said he was being cruel and that Vanessa didn't deserve this. She stood up, slammed the door, and left. That wasn't the daughter he knew. It was a version shaped by years of lies. A young woman who grew up believing a made-up truth, and now, faced with reality, chose to reject the man who'd always been there. Zach stayed there, alone in the living room, staring at the closed door. It was the second person to leave the house in less than a week. But unlike Vanessa, who left with a light suitcase and a cold heart, Grace took a piece of him. A piece he didn't know if he'd ever get back. But even wounded, he knew what he had to do. This wouldn't end here. On Monday, he went to see a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. He wanted someone who knew how to play hard, someone who understood every loophole in the law, every detail that could work in his favor. He brought everything he had: the DNA test, the diary, old conversations with Vanessa that now sounded completely different. But he also started a new investigation. He went through bank statements, found suspicious transactions, identified transfers to unknown accounts. He discovered hotel reservations on weekends when she claimed to be visiting a sick aunt. He found out about a second cell phone SIM card Vanessa kept hidden in her gym bag. And with help from a tech expert, he accessed messages she'd exchanged with 2 different men over the last 4 months. With each new discovery, more puzzle pieces fell into place. Vanessa had been having relationships with other men, diverting money from their joint account, and using Zach's name on documents to make personal investments, all without his knowledge. She wasn't just an unfaithful wife. She was a cold strategist who built a parallel life at the expense of the man who believed every word she said. Zach began gathering evidence, organizing everything with dates, names, and amounts. He set feelings aside and focused on his goal. It was as if pain had become fuel. He didn't want revenge. He wanted to end this lie once and for all. Vanessa had deceived him for 20 years. Grace had rejected him based on a lie. He wouldn't let this story keep being written by someone else's hands. It was time to take control. And he was ready to pay the price. Because sometimes, justice is the only way to start over. Zach knew that bringing the truth to court wouldn't be enough. Vanessa was careful, the kind of woman who knew how to twist words, play the victim, and turn any accusation around with just a few well-placed phrases. She dressed with authority, spoke with confidence, and had spent years building allies in strategic places. That's why, before even scheduling a hearing, he needed to dismantle the public image she'd built. While the legal process remained confidential, Zach started a separate movement behind the scenes. And he knew exactly where to begin. The first step was reaching out to his brother, Jake. For years, Jake had warned Zach about Vanessa's strange behavior, small comments, meetings at odd hours, stories that changed versions. Zach, out of love or pride, never listened. Now, showing his brother the documents and evidence, he saw in Jake's eyes a mix of pain and relief. Jake didn't want to be right. But now that everything was clear, he promised to help. And he did. With Jake's help, Zach contacted people from Vanessa's past. Old friends she'd suddenly cut off, former co-workers who disappeared from family life, even a distant cousin who'd been erased without explanation. Slowly, these forgotten pieces began forming a new picture. Vanessa pushed away anyone who knew too much, kept a tight circle she controlled, and strategically maintained her version of events at all costs. One of those people was Natalie, a former friend who worked with Vanessa on a high-profile social project years ago. When Zach reached out, she hesitated but agreed to talk. She said that back then, she discovered Vanessa used part of the project's funds for personal expenses, and when she confronted her, she was accused of defamation and cut off completely. She still had old messages, altered spreadsheets, and even an audio clip where Vanessa said on the phone, "Idle money is wasted money," and "No one needs to know everything that happens behind the scenes." This material was exactly what Zach needed. It didn't just show dishonest behavior, it revealed a pattern of manipulation. He collected everything carefully. Each document was dated, cross-referenced with other events, and filed in separate folders. He built a complete dossier. But one key piece was still missing, the recent audio recordings. With help from a tech specialist, he recovered deleted messages from Vanessa's second SIM card. Among chats with lovers and confessions about fake accounts for financial moves, there was one specific clip that changed everything. In it, Vanessa laughed and said she only marries the most stable idiot in the room, and that, if he knew the truth, he'd have had a heart attack at the altar. The mocking tone, the contempt for the people around her, the coldness with which she treated everything Zach held sacred, exposed her real self with no room for interpretation. With the evidence in hand, Zach contacted a local journalist who had covered fraud in charitable organizations before. He handed over part of the documents, with legal safeguards to ensure responsible reporting. He knew public exposure would come at a cost, but he was willing to pay it. Soon, the scandal involving Vanessa made headlines. The story spread across websites, social media, discussion groups. The audio clips went viral. People who once admired her now questioned every speech she gave, every charity event she attended, every time she posed as a spokesperson for social causes. Vanessa acted fast. She hired a reputation lawyer, issued clarification statements, claimed she was a victim of a defamation campaign orchestrated by her ex-husband. But the documents, dates, voices, bank records, and witnesses spoke louder. And the worst was yet to come. Desperate to turn things around, she played her final card. She filed a formal domestic violence accusation against Zach. She said she'd suffered in silence for years, that trauma from the marriage had kept her from reporting earlier. The accusation was met with attention. After all, these cases are sensitive, and any misjudgment could silence a real victim. But this time, she went too far. Zach was ready. Knowing this kind of attack was possible, he'd gathered neighborhood security camera footage, location records proving he wasn't present during the times she claimed, messages from Vanessa saying she missed him at home, and videos from third parties at family gatherings showing them interacting naturally. In less than 2 weeks, the accusation was dismissed due to lack of evidence and inconsistencies in her statements. The court moved quickly. The judge overseeing the divorce reviewed the history and ruled in Zach's favor. Vanessa lost her right to alimony, received none of the shared assets, and had her personal assets frozen until the end of the process due to misuse of funds during the marriage. On top of that, a restraining order was issued. Any attempt to approach would be dealt with strictly. Vanessa's fall was brutal. She went from being a respected figure to losing contracts, sponsorships for her social initiatives, and being removed from boards she was part of. People who once surrounded her for convenience now avoided her. The woman who thought she was above suspicion was now seen with distrust, rejection, and scorn. And Zach, for the first time in a long time, breathed without the weight of carrying a lie on his shoulders. The world didn't go back to how it was, but it became a place where he could walk knowing he'd done the right thing. And that, in itself, was a fresh start. Zach never imagined that rebuilding his life would take more emotional effort than enduring its collapse. When it was all over, when the papers were signed, when silence replaced the muffled echoes of memory, what remained was a nameless emptiness. He looked around the house and realized every corner held something that no longer made sense. The photos smiling in frames, the notes saved in boxes, the wall art with messages about love and family. One by one, he took them down, stacked them, burned them. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. It was like pulling thorns from the skin, uncomfortable, but unavoidable. He rebuilt his routine. Woke up early, got his body moving, forced himself to go out. He reconnected with old friends, including some he'd drifted from because of Vanessa's influence. He was welcomed back. Some hugged him without saying a word. Others apologized for never speaking up about what they knew or suspected. Zach understood. He'd ignored the signs for years too. No one wants to see what love hides. Still, what hurt most was Grace's absence. Since the day she called him weak, she disappeared. She silenced his messages, ignored his calls. The daughter he raised, who he held in his arms and taught to face the world, chose to stay away. Months passed. Zach learned to live with less, but felt, for the first time, more whole. There were good days and others when everything felt dark, but now he knew the names of the wounds he carried. And that changed everything. It was on an ordinary afternoon that the doorbell rang. When he opened the door, he found Grace standing there. Her eyes were swollen, her shoulders slumped, and she held an envelope in her hands. No makeup, no armor. Just her, like when she was little and came to apologize for breaking something by accident. She handed him the envelope and said she needed to talk. Inside was a handwritten letter and a few photos. In the first lines, she wrote that she'd found Troy, tried to connect with him as his daughter. She said he welcomed her at first, but it quickly became clear he didn't want responsibilities. At their second meeting, he told her he'd done his part, just giving the heads up. And that she was someone else's problem now. Grace left there filled with disgust and regret. For the first time, she looked back and understood what Zach had been. And what she'd let go of because of him. In the letter, she asked for forgiveness. She said she reacted badly because everything she believed had collapsed all at once. She wasn't ready to accept that her mother had lied for years, and it was easier to blame the one who exposed the truth than the one who built the lie. She asked if they could start over, even slowly, even if he wasn't ready. Zach read it all with a tight heart. Then he looked at his daughter standing there, waiting for a response. He didn't answer right away. He walked to the kitchen, got 2 glasses of water, and came back. He handed one to her. They sat down. And for minutes, silence meant more than any speech ever could. Zach didn't make promises. He said the love he felt for her was real, but now he trusted actions, not words. Grace understood. She said she'd do whatever it took. In the days that followed, she started showing up more. Not to force closeness, but to show she was willing to relearn who her father was. She helped with chores, asked about his childhood, looked for old photos. Slowly, Zach allowed himself to smile with her again. But he kept his feet on the ground. He'd learned, through pain, that the heart needs truth more than promises. During this time, Zach rediscovered a part of himself he'd let sleep, the free man. Free from pretense, from social expectations, from the roles that had chained him for 20 years. He started writing about his experience, not as an outburst, but as a way to help other men who'd lived through silent betrayals. He created a small support group, and without expecting it, became a reference. Stories like his started coming from everywhere. Some harder, others still unresolved. And he listened to each one with patience. Because he knew exactly where the pain began, and how much it cost to turn it into strength. At one of these meetings, someone asked what he regretted most about everything he'd been through. Zach answered honestly, he regretted ignoring his own intuition for so long. For accepting emotional scraps, believing that's what an honest man should endure to keep a family together. He said the real mistake wasn't loving someone who lied, but letting love become more important than self-respect. And when love demands you erase yourself, it's not love. It's a prison. Over time, Zach felt lighter. Memories still came, but they didn't control him anymore. It was like looking at scars. They don't disappear, but they stop hurting. One day, he decided to visit the place where he and Vanessa got married. He walked up to the old chapel, stood in front of the doors, and stayed in silence for a few minutes. He smiled. Not because it had been good, but because now he knew who he was. And that knowledge meant more than any ceremony, any photo, any vow made by someone who never meant to keep it. Zach went back home. Grace was waiting. She brought an apple pie, just like the ones they used to make together when she was a child. They sat down to eat. They laughed at something silly on TV. For a moment, everything felt normal. But there was something there that had never truly existed before, honesty. And with that, any kind of rebuilding becomes possible. Because the truth, even when it hurts, is the only foundation that won't collapse. And Zach learned that the hard way. But also the most freeing way. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.